Welcome to Candlewick Library. I'm Cheryl, and today I am sharing the books I read in October. I talked about how I had a really big, very ambitious TBR for October, and I was going to be doing the TBR Harvest and Halloween-a-thon. I had the pages for those things in my reading journal, and I shared how I did the bingo board for Halloween-a-thon, where you trick-or-treated around Halloween-a-thon town, and how I picked my favorite prompts from each of the areas and then some extra ones and put them on here. And with this one, you were allowed to use movies and books, and so I did do that, and I was able to get every single one of them just in the nick of time. I think I got the last one or two on the last couple of days of October. With the TBR Harvest Tombs and Tomes, I also was able to hunt and then read something with every single one of the prompts. Then the Pumpkin Patch, I was able to do that as well. And then the last thing was the TBR Harvest Bingo. And that was a really fun experience because every week they would pull out the numbers for the bingo, and whatever the number letter combination was would be whatever the prompt was. So you didn't know until they shared it what it was going to be. And I thought that was really creative and just such a fun thing to look forward to. And I ended up getting 3 bingos on my card. So that was fun. As far as the books I read, I'm going to kind of go in groupings for this. So first I will share the 2 nonfiction books I finished in October. The first one was with my daughter for school. We read The Heroes of History, Christopher Columbus, Across the Ocean Sea. And this one was not my favorite of the books from them. I think it was very honest about all the sides of Christopher Columbus and his whole story, but I found it to be a little bit more boring than they usually are, or dry, maybe boring isn't the right word, but a little bit drier than they usually are. And there were also a few stories that just were not fun to read. So I did not enjoy this as much as many of the other ones. In fact, right now we're reading the one about John Smith. We will finish that in November. And that one I am absolutely loving. I have been so engaged. There have been days when I've wanted to keep going past the chapters that we had for that day, but we haven't. We've stuck to our schedule. I think that the difference between the two made it more apparent how much I didn't like this one as much. But I still think it's a decent book, especially if you're wanting to get a full story of Christopher Columbus. I think that it's better than probably a lot of the things out there. And then there was another book that I was reading throughout the entire month of October. Every morning I would read a few chapters of this. And this was my nonfiction for myself for the month, The Devil and the White City by Erik Larson. And this is a story that has kind of 2 sides to it. It is telling the story of the World's Fair in Chicago, and then also at the same time telling the story in alternating chapters about H.H. Holmes, the serial killer that was taking advantage of the kind of chaos and influx of people from all over the place during that time. And the chapters about the World's Fair were really interesting in and of themselves. And we used to live close to Chicago, and we went down there a lot. And so I was very curious about this. I knew the World's Fair had happened, but I didn't know very much about it. And so I was wondering, okay, have we gone to any of the places that they're talking about? But then they destroyed most of it at the end. But I did find out that there were 2 buildings that we used to go to, where the Science and Industry Museum is. And then one article I read said the Art Museum as well, that those were 2 buildings that were built for it. So for sure, the Science and Industry, which we did go to quite often. And then, of course, just the area. So that was a really interesting thing. It was also interesting to me to see what Chicago was like at that time, because I don't think I've ever realized how dangerous Chicago was during that time, even before the fair, how many people were dying all the time. And so getting that history of Chicago was very interesting. And I just took a personal interest, I guess, in, because we really loved Chicago when we lived out there. I know it's changed a bit since we've been there. I am eager to actually learn more about the World's Fair and see if I can find better pictures or videos or anything about it now that I read this. And then when you go to the other story of the serial killer, that was so interesting, but so disturbing as well. Obviously, a serial killer is going to be evil, but one of the worst that I've ever read about. I had no idea. I had never heard of him before. Doug told me while I was reading that he had seen a documentary about him, so he knew something, but I had never heard of him before. And to see what he did, how many people he killed, they talked about it being somewhere around, they know for sure about 9, but it could be up to 200. All of the murders were obviously unnecessary, but there were a few that were just really unnecessary where I was asking myself, what did he have to gain from this in particular? There were other things that he had to gain from other ones, but this one in particular, what did he have to gain from it? The only reasoning behind it was just pure evil. So I think he did a really good job making the story about both things and switching back and forth, because then it didn't become overwhelming with the sadness, I think, and the disturbing nature of the serial killer story. I think that made it feel more balanced. And this was the first book I've read by Erik Larson, and I'm definitely going to read more. All right, so now I'm going to talk about the kind of adult books that I read in October. So another book that I was also reading throughout the month, but I started in September because I was reading it with a group. It was Dracula by Bram Stoker. This is one of my favorite books. I read it almost every year. And this year, for the first time, I also listened to the episodes from the Literary Life podcast as I was finishing the chapters. And that was really interesting, added a whole new level to it that I hadn't had before, even though I have read it so many times. And I just think this is one of those classics that feels like it could have been written now. I mean, obviously, there are some things that would be dated maybe to today's thinking, especially some of the medical information. However, when you find out his background and where that would have come from, you understand that that is the understanding they had at that time. So it makes sense. Even if it was written today, it would make sense to have that kind of information in the book. I find that this book is creepy, but not terrifying. It is so well written, and it's just such a great story, such a great classic story. I always recommend Dracula. I talked about wanting to be reading a lot of Agatha Christie in October. I did end up reading 3 Agatha Christie's in October, which wasn't as many as I was going to read, but I did get sidetracked by a lot of other books this month. So I am currently reading another one and planning to read the rest of them throughout November and maybe into December. So I will get all of them that I needed to have read this year done by the end of the year. But the 3 that I read in October, one of them I don't have with me right now. My daughter is reading it right now. That is called The 7 Dials Mystery. I felt like it was a little bit slow in some parts, but then it really revved up by the end. And I guessed a few things correctly, but I did not see the end coming at all. So as usual, I enjoyed that. The Sittaford Mystery, I also guessed the right answer at the end, but then I second guessed myself and thought I was wrong. And so then I went a totally different direction, and then it did go back to it. So that always is funny when that happens. And I liked this one as well, but I didn't feel like it was as strong as the other books I'm reading by her. And then Murder is Easy, I thought was really good, but it was a little bit more predictable. I actually had it narrowed down to what I thought was happening. And I knew for sure it was one of 2 people. I wasn't sure which one it was of the 2, but I was leaning more toward one of them, and that was right. I did find that it still, I felt, was more predictable than some of them, but I still wasn't 100% sure, because she has taught me through all of her books to never fully be confident in my guesses. Out of the 3 that I read, I think The 7 Dials was my favorite of the 3. But they were all solid, just good mysteries, but no new favorites among these 3. Then for my American literature class, I read 2 Shirley Jackson books because one of them was on my list and the other one I had read before, but it had been a very long time and I was interested in reading it again. So these were We Have Always Lived in the Castle and The Haunting of Hill House. The Haunting of Hill House is the one I have read before, but like I said, it was so long ago that I didn't remember anything from it, and the things that I thought I remembered didn't happen, so I was probably mixing it up with something else, even in the slight memories I had. So this was interesting because Shirley Jackson, I read The Lottery by her in high school, and that's a disturbing little story, but very interesting, and it sticks with you. And I found that that is the main thought I have with Shirley Jackson books. They just get stuck in your head and leave you thinking, or at least for me they do. With We've Always Lived in the Castle, I had the book figured out, like where it was going right from the beginning. Getting to the end, I had so many other theories come into my mind and so many questions, and so it's a pretty short book, but it gave me so much to think about, and it stuck with me for a few days after reading it. It's pretty disturbing in a lot of ways, perfect for this time of year. I think it wasn't one that I could stop and say, yes, I think this is one of my favorite books I've ever read or anything like that. I wasn't even sure how much I liked the story, but her writing is haunting and engaging. And with Haunting of the Hill House, it was the same way. I was questioning things as I was going along, wondering if the story I was getting was really happening or not, and what was real, what wasn't. And then the ending just shocked me. And like I said, even though I've read it before and I didn't remember the ending, and then this has stuck with me as well. I made my husband listen to the entire synopsis of both of these books. So I think that she is definitely an author that is worth reading. With We've Always Lived in the Castle, it is two sisters and their uncle. They live in a house. The rest of their family has been poisoned and died, and the whole town hates them. Haunting of Hill House, it is a house that people have left and said is haunted. And so this scientist goes, and he has a few people come to stay with him to try to record if there's any supernatural things happening there. And you get the story of the original family that lived there. And yeah, I don't think I can say too much more about either one of those without giving away the whole story. But again, I think they're worth the read. It's just, if you don't like stories that aren't happy endings, you probably wouldn't enjoy these. But they are, like I said, haunting, engaging, all the things. I then read 2 Jamie Jo Wright books. I've been reading her books as they're released, but I've also been going back and reading old books of hers that I'd never read before. The first one I read was The Haunting at Bonadventure Circus. And this has, like all of the books, there's the dual timeline, and they take place at the same location. So in the older timeline, it is a family that is in charge of the circus. And then in the later timeline, it is someone who is part of a company who has bought out the circus that's been abandoned for a long time. And so they're wanting to do something with this building, with the buildings and things that may or may not be supernatural or happening. And it was so fun because while I was reading it, I kept thinking, this sounds so much like Circus World in Baraboo, Wisconsin, where we went when my kids were little. I drove up there once and we rode elephants and we went into the big top, and my daughter was picked to do magic tricks for people. And it was just a really fun place to visit. And I felt like a lot of the descriptions fit that. And then at the end, she did talk about that place that she lived there. And that was her inspiration for this book. So that was kind of a fun tidbit to find out. And as far as the book went, I thought it was really good. I did prefer the past. There were some things in this book that I felt like were kind of, I don't know, like a little bit lazier writing than some of her other books. And so it was not a favorite, but I did still really enjoy it. And I stayed interested and engaged, I guess. And then with The Reckoning of Gossamer Pond, I don't know how to explain this one without giving it too much away. There were people that were believed to have committed suicide, but there were a lot of deaths that were in this area and around this pond. So this one, I switched halfway through which timeline I liked better. At the beginning, I liked the later timeline better. And then by the end, I liked the earlier timeline better. I did find that this one was a lot harder than other ones for me to get engaged with. I got kind of bored in this one. A weird thing to say because most of her books I like so much, but I would say this one was probably one of my least favorite ones so far. As it got to the ending of one of the timelines I thought was really good. And then the ending of the other timeline I did not. So that probably also fed into my afterward feelings of it. And then the last of the adult books of the month ended up being one of my very favorite books of the month. I loved this book. It was You Are Fatally Invited by Andy Pliego. This was a book that I've seen people talking about, but I just assumed with what it was about and with it being a new release that it would probably have things in it that I didn't want to read or that I might not like it. But then I heard Katrie talking about it and then Chantel talking about it, and they both liked it, and the things that they said about it really intrigued me. So I decided to go ahead and buy it. Once I started reading it, this was so hard to stop reading. By the time I got to like the last third of the book, I finished it in one night. I could not put it down. It is so good. If you like murder mystery type books, that is. This feels like a mixture of And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie and the movie Clue, both of which I love. Katrie had said something like that and said, but it didn't feel like a ripoff. And that is how I felt too. It did not feel like a ripoff. It felt definitely very inspired by those things, but it still felt very unique and creative and well written. There were a few times when there were things that were worded a little bit differently that I felt like were maybe a clumsy sentence here or there, but it was overall, I felt like it was really well written, and there were characters I really enjoyed. There were some really like subtle nods to other things as well. There was a reference to one of my two favorite Doctor Who episodes, Don't Blink, with the Weeping Angels. It was so subtle because it never let on what it was referring to. If you did not know the reference, you wouldn't have picked up on it. And I loved the ending to this book. So obviously there's violence. There are many murders, just like in Then There Were None. And there were times when I thought maybe they were a little bit more violent. They were maybe a little bit more violent than in Then There Were None. Maybe the description was just more violent. But even then, I didn't feel like it was overly or gratuitously gory. And other than that, it was so clean. I don't even remember a swear word in this book, which is so unusual for modern books. I did write down a few quotes from it. Sometimes the art of fiction isn't in how intellectual it is, but how well it makes you actually forget the world around you, which this book definitely did. Steep the mind in words and the mouth overflows. Sometimes wounds become scars, not because they've healed, but because they're hiding what's underneath from ourselves. If you like Clue, if you like And Then There Were None, or any Agatha Christie that you've read, I think you should try this. I think that if you like those things, you will like this. So now I'm going to get into the pile of middle grade books that I read in October. The last one was a graphic novel, but the rest were not, so I'll do that one last. And the first one is my DNF of the month. So I was reading The Haunting of Granite Falls by Eva Ibbotson, and I have liked books by her before. She has a very similar writing style, in my opinion, to Roald Dahl, where it's kind of ridiculous and over the top sometimes, but it can be enjoyable and funny. But this one I was not enjoying. I could not get into the story. I'm sure there are a lot of little kids that would like it. It's the story of a boy in Scotland who has inherited this castle, but it's very run down. And this man comes and wants to buy the whole thing, but the stipulation in him buying it is that there are no ghosts. So the boy has to go to the ghosts that live in the castle that he has been communing with his whole life and get them to leave and go somewhere else. But then there is a whole mystery and other things involved as well. I just didn't care. I just didn't care at all. Gave up on this book halfway through. And then another one that I did read the whole thing, but I kind of skimmed it toward the end a little bit, was The Best Worst Halloween Ever. We read The Best Worst Christmas Pageant, The Best Christmas Pageant Ever, quite a few years ago. And I think that that's a cute enough story. The Herdmans kind of drive me nuts, but it's a cute enough story. But this was like the Herdmans causing havoc and being annoying and terrible kids, but without the heart of the Christmas pageant. So I did not like this. I am going to get rid of it, but it was very short, and so I did finish the whole thing. But like I said, toward the end, I probably skimmed a little bit, a few paragraphs here and there, just trying to get to the end. I talked about how I went into Barnes & Noble, and there was an author there, and I decided to buy both of her books from her. A Bite Above the Rest and Phantom Academy. The author is Christine Vernig. She was from Wisconsin, and we talked a little bit about that. And they're both middle grade and have a Halloween feel to them. So I decided that would be a fun thing to read this month in October as well. The first one I read was A Bite Above the Rest, and this is about a young man who, he and his mom have moved to this town that is Halloween all the time. So everybody wears costumes every day. The town hall is like a vampire's castle, and everybody in there looks like vampires. And it just is, they say they do it for tourists. So that it's a tourist attraction to have this Halloween town. And he really isn't into it. And so he comes up with costumes every day that are puns or something like that. But he befriends this little girl that lives near him. There's bullying and there's a mystery, and he's trying to get to the bottom of some things in this town that he thinks are not right. I thought this was a really fun middle grade. It was clean, with the exception of some potty humor. And there are times when I'm reading middle grade books and they have that kind of stuff, and it doesn't bother me so much. the way it's written, I think, makes a difference, and then also how often. And I found that with this book and her other books, she does put that kind of stuff in more than I think is necessary. I think that middle grade children that are, think that kind of stuff is hilarious will absolutely love these books just because of that being in there. But that was something that would take me out of the story a little bit because I did feel like it might be a little bit too much. However, it wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't terrible. I've read things that were definitely worse. That was my only real complaint with both of the books, is just I felt like that they would have been better if they hadn't had that in it. They did feel a little bit more childish than a lot of the middle grade that I really love, but I still feel like they were well written and very fun, creative stories. So I think that most middle grade kids, if they're into Halloween type stuff, I think that they would really enjoy these books, and they are so much better than a lot of the ones that I've read that are out right now. And like I said, they're very clean with the exception of the potty humor. So I think that is something good too if a kid likes this kind of stuff. With Phantom Academy, it's a young man who dies. Right at the beginning, he has just died by having a coconut fall on his head. And so he ends up in this place where he has to choose between two trails, and where he goes ends up having a school for ghosts. So he's like, really, I died and I still have to go to school. So this one I didn't like as much as A Bite Above the Rest, but I still thought it was a pretty good one. With both books, I did like the characters and I felt like they were fun middle grade books. Nothing groundbreaking, but they are good. The next two I loved and became my other two favorite books of the month. The first is Secrets of Shakespeare's Grave by Darren R. Hicks. And this is the first book in the Shakespeare Mysteries. And in this, the family owns a publishing company. And there is some back and forth on if the guy that is the current owner should be or not. And the daughter gets caught up in a mystery looking for a family treasure with one of her dad's cousins. And this starts in the United States, but it ends up in England. And the prologue actually was at Mont Saint Michel in France, which was very cool because I've been there and I really liked it. And then it does end up going to Stratford upon Avon in England. And there was just something about this book. I really liked it. I can't even explain exactly why, but I felt like it was well written and fast paced. And I liked the mystery behind it. And there were things in it that make you really frustrated that they're happening and you want to fix them, but it also ended in a way where you definitely want to keep reading. I will definitely be reading the next book. And I also loved that every chapter title in this book is taken from a Shakespeare play, and at the end he has the list of that shows you which play it is from and where it is from in that play. I thought that was so creative based on what the book is about. Loved it, fully recommend. And then the other one that I really loved was The Pumpkin Princess and the Forever Knight by Stephen Banbury. And I love how the side of the book is kind of grayish, and that's because all of the pages are outlined with black, and I thought that was pretty cool looking. But this book totally surprised me. This is a girl who is running away from an orphanage, and she meets up with the Pumpkin King, and he brings her back to his town as his adopted daughter. And then there's a mystery. There's a pattern here. A lot of mysteries, obviously, in October. And I love a good mystery, whether it's middle grade, whether it's adult. I love mysteries. So there's a mystery going on and things that she has to work on. She befriends two kids in this little town world, whatever you want to call it. One is a witch and one is a vampire. They work together and I saw one of the Goodreads reviews where somebody said, there's not a main character in this book that I wouldn't die for. And I thought that was really cute because I really did love the characters as well. So I may not go that far, but I really loved the characters. I really loved the writing. And the relationship between Eve, the main girl, and the Pumpkin King reminded me a lot, or it gave me the vibes a few times of Matthew and Anne in Anne of Green Gables. I loved that when it happened. When I felt that, there were a few scenes where I was just like, oh my gosh, this is Matthew and Anne. And I wrote a few quotes down from this one as well. Together, they were finding their home in one another's quiet. I think it might be a little easier if I took classes like others and wasn't homeschooled, but Mom says she didn't go through all of the trouble of conjuring me up just to let someone else watch me all night. She always really liked her time with me. One of the characters that is homeschooled says that, and I loved that because I feel that way. As a homeschool mom, I love the time I've had with my children. So of course I had to write that quote down. But yeah, this one I fully recommend as well. If you are, if you don't read magic, there was only one thing in it that kept it from being a 5-star for me. That was the explanation of the creation of witches. And it was like something about making a pact with the darkness or something like that. However, you do see in this book a difference in the witches at this time period of there being, just like with all the other characters, of there being some that are good, some that are bad. So it wasn't that all the characters were still doing that kind of stuff. So that was my only problem with it. It didn't dwell on that. It just mentioned that in passing. And that was the only thing, like I said, that kept it from a 5-star for me, probably. So if you don't read anything with witches or anything like that, then obviously you wouldn't want to read this book. And then the last one that is a graphic novel was Misfit Mansion by Kay DeVault. This had really cute illustrations throughout, and it's about a house where all of these monsters live. And this one in particular, she wants to leave and see what the town is like and what real people are like. But she keeps being told that the humans hate them, would never let them survive if they leave. But they get out and they're going and experiencing some of the things in the town. Then there's some other things that you think you know, but then they kind of change toward the end. But I thought it was really heartwarming. I thought the friendships were really cute. It's really clean as well. It was just a really fun graphic novel. I love it when it has a good art style and then a good story as well. So perfect for Halloween time. So that's it. Those are all the books I finished in October. And as far as my favorite books of the month, obviously Dracula is one of my favorite books. But as I've said before, I always try to pick my favorite book of the month from one that is not a reread. But I could not 100% pick one this month because the other 3 I loved so much. So it was kind of a 3-way tie between You Were Fatally Invited, The Pumpkin Princess and the Forever Knight, and The Secrets of Shakespeare's Grave. So I think that You Are Fatally Invited and Pumpkin Princess were the 2 top of those 3 just because of the heart in Pumpkin Princess and the fact that I could not put The Fatally Invited down. But Shakespeare's Grave is a very close third. Let me know if you've read any of these and what you've thought of them, if you did, and what your favorite book was in October.